the F1 Focus Podcast with Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.
Welcome back to Formula One Focus with Hendrik Verwoerd. Lots of stuff happening, exciting developments, new calendar dropping, Red Bull up shenanigans, and then of course the Canadian Grand Prix. Welcome back, Hendrik.
Nice to be back with you, yes.
So let's start with the calendar. I mean, the biggest talking point is the fact that Canada has now suddenly moved back, or not suddenly, we sort of expected it, but there's a clash. Talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, 24 races as expected, and a few things that stand out, obviously. And the first is that we start in Australia again next year, like we did this year, and then we go to China and Japan before we go to the Middle East, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And this is again because of Ramadan, that time of the year. But then the next interesting one is where they have now paired basically the Canadian and the Monaco Grand Prix. Not paired, it's not like it's a week apart. They are 2 weeks apart, but they do now follow on each other. And the main reason for that is a logistical reason. It's to save on shipping costs, and obviously carbon footprint and stuff like that. And, it makes a lot of sense to be in the North America after you go from Miami.
Sorry, just one thing. You said Monaco or Miami?
No, Miami stays where it is. Canada comes forward and Monaco goes back.
Okay, but you say which two are twinned now?
Again, they're not twin. They are 2 weeks apart. So, but in the same continent. So Miami and Canada are in the same continent now. Sorry, did I say Monaco? I mean Miami. Yeah. So it's Miami, then Montreal, and then Monaco. But they are each 2 weeks apart. It's not like they're a week apart. But it's for logistical reasons, really. And to minimize the carbon footprint of the sport. So that's the one thing. The other thing, of course, is that there is no Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola next year, as expected. We kind of knew about that. But in the place of that, we've got a new Spanish Grand Prix. Officially, the Spanish Grand Prix will now be a semi-street circuit in Madrid, the Madring combination of Madrid and the ring. And that will be later in the year. So Barcelona is still going to be there, but there's no official name for it yet. They don't know whether they're going to call it the Barcelona Grand Prix or the Catalan Grand Prix or something like that. So, yeah, that's the main reason. A lot of people are upset about the fact that the Canadian Grand Prix next year will clash with Indy 500. That's the big talking point. Normally what you would have seen, because Indy 500 is kind of fixed the final weekend, the Memorial Weekend in America, of the final weekend in May. Normally, like we had earlier a couple of weeks ago, when you had it on the same day as Monaco, because of the time difference, people can watch the Monaco Grand Prix basically in the afternoon, and then early evening they can switch over and watch the Indy 500, which has been kind of a set combination for motorsport enthusiasts for quite a long time. Now, that's not going to happen next year. Next year, as we say, Monaco is going back, I think, about 2 weeks. And that means that the Canadian Grand Prix, which is in exactly the same time zone as the Indy 500 and in Indianapolis, there's going to be a clash there. So basically people are going to have to choose which one of the two events they're going to want to watch. And the Americans are not happy about that. It seems like Roger Penske, who's the owner of the IndyCar series, basically is very unhappy about that, and I think understandably so. They see it as a kick in the guts, basically. Formula One saying, we don't care about you, IndyCar. We don't care about you, Indy 500. We will have our race on the dates that suit us the best. So. That's a bit of a war of words, I think, that's going on at the moment, and that is probably not going to die down until they've sort of sat around. Maybe they get Domenicali in there and get him to explain that, listen, Formula One is a rather larger sport on its own as a series, than IndyCar. Indy 500 might be a standalone worldwide, event that is probably unequal by anything else. I've been there. It's an amazing event, and it's quite rightly seen as an iconic event. That's the word I'm looking for, an iconic event. But Formula One is larger than that series and is a worldwide series and is a 24 race series.
So, just talking about the weather. We're going to talk about the races now. And one of the things you mentioned before we started talking, it's going to be cooler. Now, if they move it even further back, isn't it going to be a bit too cold? I mean, isn't it? Didn't I see somewhere there might be a danger of snow or ice or something like that?
Well, if they don't want to bring it too early, because obviously the later they can have it in let's say the first part of the year. We're talking about the Canadian Grand Prix.
Yeah.
There is a serious danger of heavy snowfall, earlier if you run it in May sometimes. So they want to run it as late as possible. And let me just quickly go back to that date there. They have Montreal now, the 24th of May. They would probably have. They've always basically stuck to the early June date, Canada, because of the weather conditions there. So, there might be a bit of a risk. We don't know, one can never say. But it is an inherent risk if you run too early, or let's say, very late spring. They would like to run it as late as possible in their spring and early as possible in their summertime.
Yeah, I think back to those times when they were testing at Barcelona. Remember the one year they pitched up there and it was snow on the track and everything. I mean, imagine they pitch up in Canada and they can't race because there's snow or whatever, ice or sleet. I suppose that's quite a
it really doesn't have tires for that yet.
Yeah, no, sure. No, that's interesting. Of course, the main thing from South African point of view, there's no South African Grand Prix, and it does not even seem to be a glimmer of hope for South African Grand Prix, despite a lot of people making a lot of noises about it.
Well, I think, finally, I hope people have come down to earth about this situation. Again, we haven't heard or seen anything from the government about their proposal to get some tenders in for South African Grand Prix. Clearly, that process seemed to have stalled. I'm not that interested that I'm trying to follow up and trying to find out what's going on there. I'm waiting for things to happen and to see if something pops up in the news, somewhere. But at the moment, nothing is happening. We are in early June. Earlier the deadline was in March. I think that was then extended to May sometime, and we're still early in June. We haven't heard anything. We just hear that the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture are going to try and raise the salary of the soccer coach, I think it is. So that seems to be something that they are looking at. So certainly not a Formula One Grand Prix in South Africa, and we've discussed this at length in the past.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen because it's not financially viable.
You mentioned the Moroccan Grand Prix last time we spoke.
Yeah.
Not on the calendar either, but I suppose that's a bit early.
Yeah, and neither is Thailand, of course. I mean, there are, there's a number of them that seem to be quite close in the queue. And obviously the year after 2026, Barcelona is not going to be there anymore. Zandvoort is not going to be there anymore in 2027. So, there are openings there, and there are these events that are standing in the queue. From what I can see from the outside, Thailand seems to be closest. But, that can just be, some hype in the media. We don't know what the exact nature of this or the status of the negotiations are behind the scenes. But certainly, there are alternatives, and there are some events that are currently on the calendar that are not going to be there for much longer.
Next year, of course, is all changed. It's the new regulations, new engine regulations, new chassis regulations, and part of going hand in hand with that is the fact that they've now increased the testing days to 3 sessions of 3 days each at both Bahrain and Barcelona. That's a bit of a departure from the last couple of years where they've been reducing it all the time. I suppose they have to have these extended number of days to test, to make sure the teams are not going to get caught flat-footed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties into something that has emerged today in the news, and that is that Formula One has now decided they're not going to have this massive big one launch at the beginning of next season like they had earlier this year. And for that specific reason, it's because of the new dispensation coming in, because of the fact that the teams will be flat out testing in those 3 testing sessions. And the first one seems to be aimed at early or late in January already. So you cannot really fit in a team launch when they are still all working as hard as they possibly can on the new cars, and obviously the new color schemes, which will tie in with new sponsorships. And you cannot hold an event, early in January because those things are still being finalized. And I think the feeling is also, from what I can gather, The feeling is that this year's mass launch was very much tied into the 75th anniversary year of Formula One, and the feeling is that you know, if you do it every year, it's going to start falling flat. So you rather wait until there's another special date or a special, you know, event or something that you can celebrate, and then you have, you know, at the beginning of that season you have a full team launch. But it's certainly not going to work with a new technical dispensation coming in for next year. The teams are not going to be ready. They're not going to have cars to show. They you know, so it's not going to work anyway. So I think it's you know, it's the logical conclusion or the logical decision to make.
You mentioned earlier it's June now, and we still don't have clarity about the final electric side of it. Let's talk about increasing or decreasing it. You know, it has to be 50-50 at the moment in terms of power output. Now they might be reducing it to make sure that the car actually doesn't run out of fuel or out of power, whatever, down the straight kind of thing. Nothing on that yet?
No, nothing yet. I think, you know, the feeling is that if they need to adjust that, and the closer you get to the final product for next year, I think the more they will be able to understand if and how and if it's necessary and how they can, you know, mitigate that situation. So I don't sense a huge amount of urgency in that regard.
I'm wondering about that. I mean, we always hear about. Remember when Braun started? They took over the Honda team, but they put a Mercedes engine in the back. It was sort of a problem, right? And I mean, okay, maybe they just turned down the electric component of it and up the horsepower on the internal combustion engine. I suppose it's not that difficult, but I mean, it sounds a bit haphazard to me at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think it's got anything to do with the mounting of the engines. I think it's
That
more
I'm saying is so close to the start of the season, and you still don't have finality. You know, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, maybe you have a smaller electric component, physically smaller, that takes up less space, weighs less. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, that's got to do with architecture. So, you know, it's got to do with how large the particular unit is and where you place it and that sort of thing. So I don't think that's really too much of a problem for them.
All right, then, of course, the other news at the moment is Max Verstappen being on probation almost. You know, he said for the next two races, he can't put a foot wrong. You know, you have a race ban, and he still has to be in his best behavior until after the Austin Grand Prix. Because he's going to be back on 9 points. And then Red Bull has now put some contingency plans in place. Talk to us about that.
Well, yeah, you know, there's a lot of talk going on. Will the FIA actually allow Max to be banned? Should he, you know, find himself in that position? But I think that comes from people who do not really understand or don't want to understand. And some comments coming from ex-drivers who are very, I don't know, they don't seem to be understanding the bigger picture. If you do not ban Max, if he has to be banned, it's going to be an absolute disaster in terms of driver discipline. You know, you cannot make an exception for somebody, even though he is a reigning champion and a 4-time champion. Michael Schumacher was basically deleted from the 1997 World Championship. You know, because of what he did to Jacques Villeneuve that year. So, you know, you cannot do that. At that point, he was a 2 times world champion. So you cannot do that. So what the question now is, what is Red Bull going to do? And I think we spoke about it last year. Now they've come up with, I think, a clearer picture. Also, you know, together with a decision by the World Motorsport Council earlier this week, together with a calendar decisions, they also granted the request by Red Bull for Arvid Lindblad to get his super license, despite the fact that he's only 17 and only turns 18 next year. That opens up, you know, a possibility for Red Bull to fill some holes should it come to be that Verstappen cannot drive in one race. The feeling is at the moment that Isaac Hadjar is going to be, you know, the replacement for Verstappen for that single race, because he is the most impressive of those that are next in line. You know, certainly not Liam Lawson, and Lindblad is a little bit too young for that. They certainly cannot put him, you know, just on a one-off at the age of 17 in a Formula One race in that particular car that only Max Verstappen can drive. But, you know, that'll have a knock-on effect, obviously, further down, because now you have only you have Liam Lawson driving for Racing Bulls, and there's a seat open if Hajar goes to Red Bull, and that means that Lindblad can maybe go in there. Or maybe even be as a just a reserve driver, because they also have Ayumu Awaza. I don't know these names at the top of my head. Ayumu Iwaza as a reserve driver that can probably fill in Hajar's place at Racing Bulls. Wow, that sounds very complicated, all of
Yeah.
that. But there seems to be a contingency plan in place, and that it could mean that if Verstappen gets banned, the Hajar will be the guy to replace him, with a knock-on effect further down the Red Bull order.
Let's talk about the Canadian Grand Prix. You mentioned earlier cool temperatures. When I think Canada, I think Wall of Champions. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And, we remember famous races there. Vettel being forced to allow Hamilton to come past, when they actually stopped after the race. He removed the #1 banner and put it in front of his own car. Things like that. What do you expect from this race? I mean, you talked about softer compounds and the likes, weather likes. Mercedes maybe a bit better suited to this. What can we look forward to?
Well, I think motorsport enthusiasts can look forward to a great weekend, of course, because it is Le Mans as well this weekend. So Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock, it's Le Mans. Later on in the evening, it's Canadian Grand Prix qualifying, and then Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, it's the end of Le Mans, and 10 o'clock South African time on Sunday evening, it's the Canadian Grand Prix. So there's certainly a lot to look forward to. Specifically, just quickly as an aside, 2 South Africans, of course, taking part in the Le Mans this weekend. The 2 Van der Linde brothers. So I think all of us in South Africa will be holding thumbs for them. Sheldon and Kelvin will both be involved in BMW Works drives. Sheldon, the younger of the 2, will be in a hypercar. There's 21 hypercars in that class this year. I mean, that's just incredible. 21 of them, 62 cars in total, apparently. And Kelvin will be in a GT3 BMW. So, certainly both of them hopefully will be in contention to win the individual classes, if not the overall victory. But also interesting, I just love, I don't follow the series that closely, but I just love a weekend where you can have Le Mans as well, and those sports cars are just absolutely incredible. One world champion, Formula One world champion driving in one of the teams for Cadillac is Jenson Button, and for Ferrari, in fact, the customer Ferrari team, a Formula One Grand Prix winner in Robert Kubica. So, we do have some links. There are 19 former Formula One drivers in the field, and amongst them, the one world champion and the one race winner. So lots to look forward to this weekend. Just getting back to the Canadian Grand Prix, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one. Completely different layout to the Spanish Grand Prix, the Barcelona track that we had 2 weeks ago. In Canada, you've basically got 2 long straights connected with some chicanes in between and a hairpin at the end. So, the completely different characteristics in terms of what it asks of the cars and the drivers. And you mentioned the wall of champions, the final chicane, a very tricky one. Obviously, a nice overtaking spot, just under braking for that chicane, and can be very, very tricky because you're coming down from absolute flat out. I mean, 340 k's an hour. And you have to brake for that chicane, and you have to bring it down to probably something like 70 or 80 k's for that. So it's going to be a very interesting race. Cooler conditions are expected, as always, in the region of 18 to 20 degrees ambient. So that means that the track temperature is not going to be, in the 50s. And that, cooler conditions is something that Mercedes always looks forward to. So they've been struggling over the last 3 weekends or 3 races, the triple header in Europe, because of the higher temperatures, and that is specifically what they are looking forward to. Obviously, Red Bull would like to find out whether their car will suit in its current configuration, whether it will suit this circuit layout, and specifically, the lots of curb hopping that they're going to do there. And whether the car will be able to manage that. And the same goes for the rest. I think McLaren is probably the least concerned, because they seem to be very good in all conditions and at all kinds of circuits. So, the question is how is the battle between Piastri and Norris going to fold out this weekend? So I think a number of things to look out for. Max has got to be very careful. Is Yuki going to be able to get closer to him, not only in qualifying but in the race as well? That's at Red Bull, at McLaren. I've just mentioned the two drivers there. Mercedes, are they going to be able to be more competitive in the cooler conditions? Ferrari, poor old Lewis Hamilton, will he find his mojo this weekend? It's the event where he won his very first Formula One Grand Prix in 2007. So it holds good memories for him. Hopefully, he can find something that will make him feel better there as well. So, and who knows? We haven't spoken about the Aston Martin situation yet because we don't know at this point, as we speak, what is going to happen with the driver there. Lance Stroll had the procedure on his hand, I think on the Sunday of the Spanish Grand Prix, and we've not had a peep out of them about what are they going to do. We speculated last weekend about, maybe Philip Drugovich or Stoffel van Doorn will be able to stand in if he cannot drive. Both of them are in fact in action at Le Mans this weekend, and they're practicing as we speak, really, literally, as we speak at the moment. The first practice is on. And nothing from them seems to indicate to me that they're going to allow Lance to drive.
They're not going to. They are going to allow him to drive. He's going to drive.
Yeah.
So there's no.
Yeah.
That's interesting. No, I saw the article about Fernando Alonso saying with the difference that Adrian Newey is already making. When he attends a meeting, people are very careful not to say something that might not be right because he will catch them out. And you can just sort of see the lifting of standards starting to happen. He was in Spain. Where was it? In Monaco, with his little notebook there, going into the pits, and I could almost see, somebody like that walking around that place is definitely going to make a difference, even if it doesn't make any difference to the car this year at all. But the fact that the standards are lifting, I think that's what we're getting at. And you talked about Yuki Tsunoda and Stroll being sort of an uncertain thing, and Honda are going to Aston Martin next year. A year or two ago, there was a lot of rumors about maybe Yuki Tsunoda following Honda to Aston Martin. Do you think his shares have plummeted since his unexpected promotion to Red Bull and his failure to perform?
Look, I mean, Honda is on the record, and they've always been like this, saying that they do not get involved in driver selection. They would welcome, a Japanese driver, but that doesn't mean that they are going to insist on it. And they've been consistent over the years about that. So I don't think that's a viable option for Yuki to go to Aston Martin. Lots of things are hanging in the air at the moment in Formula One. Driver moves and performance parameters and stuff like that because of the looming new dispensation next year. A lot of people are not quite willing to commit to any moves at this point because they don't know what next year is going to hold. Aston Martin could well emerge as the top team next year, and then everybody will be sorry that they didn't make the move if they didn't make the move, and everybody will be happy if they made the move if they did make the move. So it's all really up in the air. But I do agree with you. I think the feeling is at Aston Martin that Adrian Newey has certainly injected some, I don't know if you can call it discipline, but some maybe urgency, maybe more focus, better focus. So that's absolutely possible. If you have somebody of that stature coming to your team, everybody will listen to what he has to say. And yes, we'll be careful not to make sweeping statements that he can easily refute. So, or make claims of things working and he could easily point out that, no, it won't work. So, I think things are certainly looking up for Aston Martin. And just to maybe throw back to a point I made last week, in this whole process, maybe Lawrence can now find an excuse to get rid of his son without losing any face, and get a competitive teammate in there for Fernando Alonso next year. And then your question becomes very, very pertinent. Then, who will be the person that can go in? Because they're not going to get rid of Fernando, and Fernando is certainly not going to leave them before he knows what's happening next year. Next year could well be his last year, but he's not going to leave before that. And as I've said on a number of occasions, if Lawrence really is serious, and it all seems to be the case, that he would like his team to become world champions, then certainly he needs to get somebody in there that can contribute to that much more so than Lance can.
A driver that's been mentioned now in terms of maybe Aston Martin and who's not been confirmed yet and sort of up in the air, George Russell. Because once again, it seems like Toto Wolff is chasing the spectre of Max Verstappen, maybe, and then George is being left high and dry. His contract expires at the end of the year. Still no news. I mean, typically it's a bit early. Probably do it over the summer or something like that. But rumors about him sort of being in demand. Christian Horner saying that you cannot underestimate it. He rates him quite highly. If Max leaves him, and George might be the man that the kingmaker almost, let's call it that, the one who can decide, where he wants to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these things are all hanging in the air because of the looming 2026 dispensation. It is a bit early for Mercedes to or to announce the renewal of the contract for George. Although I do recall that at some points earlier, in their heydays with Hamilton and Rosberg, the announcement did come much earlier than June on a number of occasions. The confirmation. So maybe there is something in there, and obviously no team principal is going to say no, I don't want Max Verstappen. And if Verstappen is on the market, then certainly everybody's going to try and get him. And again, his decision is going to depend on what he perceives is going to happen in 2026. So again, this is a situation where lots of things, are hanging in the air. It's literally a question of, which domino will fall first, or which are all the chairs going to be occupied. In the game. So who knows?
Last question. Cadillac. We heard an interview with Valtteri Bottas saying that he was blocked from going to Red Bull by a higher up figure. And I suppose that could be either Christian Horner or Helmut Marko, who I tend to lean towards the latter. Cadillac hasn't announced yet. Sergio Perez, Guan Yu Zhou, Valtteri Bottas, and someone else was in the running there. Any news from that? I mean, I think Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez will make an exceptional pairing, especially for a new team with all that experience. They know what's going wrong. They know what to pay attention to. Joe might be fast. He might have a big Chinese backing maybe. But the fact that you need experience when you start a new team. What's your thinking? What are you getting on that?
Well, I don't think my thinking has changed, and because there's nothing that at this point that has given me any contraindication. My thinking at the beginning of the season was that the Cadillac will probably take Sergio Perez, because of the Mexican connection there, and I think they are on record saying that they would like to get an American driver, a US driver, not necessarily a North American driver, but they would like to get a United States driver, but only on merit. They're not going to put an American driver there on just because of the fact that he's an American, and I struggle to see any other outcome. It makes so much sense to get Perez in there, and he's not even being talked about as a possible replacement for Verstappen at this point. That indicates to me that I think he's probably very high on the list for Cadillac, and it would make sense for them to get Sergio in there, and then maybe get a youngster, from somewhere, that they could give an opportunity for in a team that there will not be a lot of high expectations from them, and so therefore there will not be a lot of pressure on a rookie or even a current young driver, to allow him to flourish there. So to me, that makes a lot of sense that they and who knows, it could be one of the Haas drivers that could go there. I'm not sure about Ocon, but maybe what's the youngster's name? Ollie Behrman. So that could make sense, but I'm pretty sure about Perez. The second seat, I'm not sure that they're going to take somebody that is experienced like Valtteri. Maybe Valtteri is the guy that Aston Martin should look at next to Alonso.
Yeah, that's not a bad plan, actually. Now, I was thinking in terms of the Ferrari engine. Bottas had experience with the Ferrari engine. Like you said, the Haas drivers have experience with that Ferrari engine, because Cadillac will be using a Ferrari engine initially until they bring out their own, or to use their own one.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I didn't think of a Bottas to Aston Martin. Well, I'm starting to think that Max might not be racing at all next year. I just have a feeling. Maybe I'm
Well,
wrong.
that is the possibility, and we
Mm,
have spoken about this. That I have said earlier that he's got an alternative. He's got three choices. He could stay where he is. He could leave and go to a different team, or he could retire altogether from Formula One. He's got plenty of other stuff, and I think Le Mans is probably one of the challenges that he would look at.
mm,
And he's got iRacing. He's got his own GT3 team. So there's lots of things for him to do. And 4 times a Formula One world champion. It's
mm.
not it's not such a small achievement. So there could be many good reasons for Max not to carry on in Formula One if he's not happy with his situation.
All right, Hendrik, thank you. That's interesting as always. Once again, next week we'll have a talk afterwards, see what happened. Maybe something else fell out of the tree. You never know. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And good luck to the Van der Lindes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I didn't even know that. That's good news, man. I'm watching that. The lucky thing about Le Mans is you can switch on the TV anytime, at night or day, and you can watch them racing live. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I like it. All right, man. Thanks, Hendrik.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
The F1 Focus Podcast with Envia Velman and Hendrik Verwoerd.